boss decides to follow his bodyguard, but cries when he discovers where he went every day. Richard Thompson controlled every minute of his employees' lives with the precision of a Swiss watchmaker. At 58, the businessman had built a transportation empire in New York City based on strict discipline and absolute punctuality. But lately, something was deeply troubling Richard. His personal bodyguard, Marcus Johnson, a 42-year-old man who had worked for him for 5 years, had started behaving strangely. Every day, exactly at 3:30 in the afternoon, Marcus would request a 2-hour break, citing urgent medical appointments. At first, Richard didn't question it. Marcus had always been impeccable at work, a dedicated professional who arrived early and never complained about overtime. But the absences became so regular that they aroused his boss's suspicion. What kind of medical treatment required daily appointments at the same time? Richard's secretary, Mrs. Betty, a 63-year-old woman who knew all the employees like her own children, tried to defend Marcus a few times. She said the man was going through personal difficulties and deserved understanding. Richard, however, wouldn't tolerate personal problems interfering with the professional environment. Marcus was a tall man, broad-shouldered, with an always serious expression. His dark skin contrasted with the impeccable suits he wore, and he kept a military haircut that matched his upright posture. Despite his imposing appearance, there was something melancholic in his dark eyes that Richard had never noticed before. On a rainy Tuesday in March, Richard's patience ran out. He decided it was time to find out what was really happening with his most trusted employee. When Marcus requested his usual break, Richard waited 15 minutes and then decided to follow him personally. The businessman took his black sedan and kept a safe distance as he trailed Marcus's gray Honda Civic through the congested streets of New York City. The drive lasted 40 minutes, passing through neighborhoods Richard only knew by name. Marcus drove slowly, as if stretching out a journey he didn't want to complete. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now back to the story. Richard parked discreetly when he saw Marcus stop in front of the gates of Greenwood Cemetery in Brooklyn. His heart raced. Why would a healthy 42-year-old man visit a cemetery every day? Richard's mind began conjuring disturbing theories. Maybe Marcus was involved with dangerous people. Maybe it was a secret meeting for illegal business. Marcus stepped out of the car carrying a small bouquet of white flowers he had bought at a nearby florist. Richard had never noticed his bodyguard stopping to buy flowers during work hours. The discovery made him even more intrigued and concerned. Keeping his distance, Richard followed Marcus along the winding paths of the cemetery. The place was well kept, with leafy trees offering shade to visitors and graves arranged in symmetrical rows. The sound of Marcus's footsteps echoed in the solemn silence, interrupted only by the distant chirping of birds. Marcus stopped in front of a simple grave in a quieter section of the cemetery. Richard hid behind a tree large enough to conceal his sturdy frame and watched, stunned, as his employee knelt on the damp grass. What Richard saw next left him completely frozen. Marcus, the strong man who had protected his family for years, began to cry silently as he arranged the white flowers on the headstone. Her tears fell uncontrollably, and he spoke softly to someone who was no longer there. "Hi, my love," whispered Marcus, his voice choked with emotion. "Daddy's here again. How was your day in heaven?" Richard felt a lump in his throat. For the first time in years, he was witnessing the genuine pain of another human being. Marcus wasn't involved in shady business or secret meetings. He was simply visiting someone he loved and had lost. The rain began to fall harder, but Marcus didn't move. He remained kneeling, talking about his workday, the people he protected, how much he missed hearing a laugh he'd never hear again. Richard, getting soaked under the tree, could no longer maintain his stern boss persona. Something inside him was breaking. Marcus pulled a small notebook from his jacket pocket and began reading quietly. They were stories, Richard realized, children's stories he used to tell someone who could no longer listen. The man's voice trembled as he reached the end of the tale, and he kissed his palm before gently touching the headstone. Richard could no longer stay hidden. Something compelled him to step forward, even knowing he'd be discovered. When he was a few feet away, he could read the name engraved on the stone, Olivia Johnson, 2015-2023, Daddy loves you forever. The businessman froze. Olivia was only 8 when she passed. Marcus had a daughter and Richard had never known. In 5 years of working together, Richard had never cared about his employee's personal life. He'd never asked if he had a family, dreams, or someone special in his life. Guilt settled in Richard's chest like a heavy stone. He remembered every time he'd been cold to Marcus, every instance he'd treated the man as just an employee, never considering he had a life full of joys and sorrows outside the office. Marcus sensed someone behind him and turned slowly. When he saw Richard standing in the rain, soaked and with a look of shock on his face, he showed no anger or embarrassment, only deep sadness and exhaustion. "Mr. Richard," Marcus said, standing and wiping his tears, "I can explain." "You don't have to explain anything," Richard replied, his voice barely audible. "I'm the one who should explain." The two men stood in silence for a few minutes, the rain falling on them as they processed the moment. Richard looked again at the headstone and felt his chest tighten. Olivia had passed in 2023. That meant Marcus had been working for him when he lost his daughter, and Richard hadn't even noticed. "She was my whole life," Marcus said, breaking the silence. "My reason for waking up every day." Richard wanted to say something, anything to ease the man's pain, but the words wouldn't come. He'd never learned how to handle others' grief. He was always good at solving business problems, making tough decisions, leading teams. But here, faced with another person's raw sorrow, he felt utterly lost. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" Richard finally asked. Marcus gave a sad smile and shook his head. "With all due respect, Mr. Richard, you never showed interest in your employees' personal lives, and after she was gone, I couldn't talk about it with anyone." Marcus's words hit Richard like a punch to the gut. It was true. He kept a professional distance from all his employees, believing it made him a more efficient leader. He'd never imagined that coldness could cause such isolation and pain for those who depended on him. "She loved stories," Marcus continued, gazing tenderly at the headstone. "Every day when I got home from work, she'd ask me to tell her a different one. Now I come here and tell the stories she can no longer hear." Richard felt tears forming in his eyes. He had a daughter too, Rebecca, who lived in another state with his ex-wife. When was the last time he had told her a story? When was the last time he had truly talked to Rebecca about anything unrelated to money or work? "Marcus, I'm so sorry," said Richard, and for the first time in decades his voice trembled with genuine emotion. "I'm sorry for everything." "You're not to blame for anything," Marcus replied. "Life can be unfair sometimes, and we learn to live with it." But Richard knew he was at fault. Maybe not for Olivia's passing, but certainly for how he had treated Marcus during the hardest time of the man's life. How many times had Richard been impatient over small delays? How many times had he demanded overtime when Marcus likely needed to be home with his daughter? The rain had eased, but the two men remained there, each lost in their own thoughts. Richard began to understand why Marcus had asked for those daily breaks. They weren't medical appointments or suspicious business. They were a father, trying to keep alive the connection with the daughter he loved more than life itself. "May I ask what happened?" Richard said gently. Marcus took a deep breath before answering. "She got sick. It started as a simple flu, but turned into something more serious. The doctors did what they could, but it wasn't enough." Richard closed his eyes, imagining the pain Marcus must have felt, watching his daughter fade away, powerless to help. As a father, he couldn't think of anything worse than losing a child. "She was so bright," Marcus continued, a nostalgic smile appearing on his face. "She wanted to be a veterinarian when she grew up. Loved animals. Always brought stray cats home and begged me to let them stay." "And you did?" Richard asked, genuinely curious. "Every time," Marcus laughed, and for a moment his sadness gave way to a bittersweet happiness. "Our house was always full of animals, dogs, cats, even a parrot she found with a hurt wing." Richard pictured Marcus's home full of life and joy, so different from his own empty, silent mansion. When was the last time his house had been filled with laughter and play? When was the last time he had cared about something beyond spreadsheets and meetings? "Marcus, why do you still work for me?" Richard suddenly asked. "After everything you've been through, why not find another job?" Marcus thought for a moment before answering. "Because taking care of your family gives me purpose. When I protect you and your family, I feel like I'm honoring my daughter's memory. She always told me I was the best dad in the world because I took good care of people." Marcus's words struck Richard like lightning. While he had seen Marcus only as an employee, Marcus saw his work as a way to honor his daughter's memory. The man had turned his pain into dedication, his loss into purpose. "I've been a terrible boss," Richard admitted. "No, sir. You've always been fair to me. Paid me on time, gave me chances to grow. We're just not close, but that's normal between an employer and employee." But Richard no longer accepted that explanation. He didn't want to be just a distant boss anymore. He wanted to be a better human being, someone who could see the pain and joy in the people around him. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. The two men walked back to the parking lot together, the silence between them now comfortable rather than awkward. Richard offered Marcus a ride, but he preferred to drive his own car. Before parting ways, Richard did something he had never done before. He asked for Marcus's personal phone number. "If you need anything at all, call me," Richard said. "And Marcus, take all the time you need to visit your daughter. No more excuses about doctor's appointments." Marcus was surprised by Richard's sudden change, but thanked him with a nod. He wasn't used to genuine kindness, especially from his boss. That night, Richard couldn't sleep. He stayed in the living room of his Upper East Side penthouse, gazing out the window at the city lights and thinking about his conversation with Marcus. For the first time in years, he wasn't preoccupied with meetings or contracts. His thoughts were with Olivia, a girl he had never met but who had inexplicably touched his heart. Richard picked up the phone and called Rebecca, his 25-year-old daughter who lived in Washington, D.C. They hadn't spoken in 3 months, and their last conversation had been about increasing her allowance. "Dad?" Rebecca answered, surprised by the call. "Is something wrong?" "No, sweetheart. I just wanted to hear your voice," Richard said, realizing for the first time how strange his own voice sounded when speaking affectionately. "Oh, okay. How are you?" "I'm fine. And you? How's school? How are you feeling?" Rebecca was silent for a few seconds, clearly taken aback by her father's sudden interest in her personal life. "Dad, are you sure you're okay? You never ask about these things." Richard's heart clenched. His own daughter was startled when he showed genuine concern for her. What kind of father had he been all these years? "I know, Rebecca, and I'm sorry for that. I want to change. I want to know how you're really doing." The conversation lasted 2 hours. Rebecca told him about her psychology studies, about the boyfriend Richard had never met, about her dreams for the future. Richard discovered his daughter was an incredible person, full of plans and ambitions that went far beyond the money he deposited into her account every month. When he hung up, Richard felt both happy and devastated. Happy to have rediscovered his daughter, but devastated to realize how many years he had lost keeping her at a distance. The next morning, Richard arrived at the office with a different purpose. He stopped by Mrs. Betty's desk, his secretary, and for the first time in 15 years of working together, asked how she was feeling. "Mr. Richard, are you feeling all right?" Mrs. Betty asked, adjusting her glasses and studying her boss with concern. "I'm fine, Betty. I just want to know how you are. How's your family?" Mrs. Betty was clearly suspicious, but began talking about her grandchildren, her retired husband learning to cook, and her daughter trying to start a small business. Richard listened to every word with genuine interest, discovering his secretary had a rich and fascinating life outside the office. When Marcus arrived at work, Richard called him into his office. The security guard entered with his usual posture, but there was something different in his eyes, a cautious curiosity about what had changed in his boss. "Marcus, please have a seat," Richard said, gesturing to one of the chairs in front of his desk. "Sir, if this is about yesterday, I can explain better." "It's not about yesterday. Well, not exactly. It's about the last 5 years. Richard interrupted. "I want to know about you, about your life, your dreams, your fears. I want to know the man who protects my family every day." Marcus looked visibly uncomfortable. He wasn't used to personal attention, especially from Richard. "Sir, I'm not sure I understand." "Marcus, do you have other children?" "No, sir. Olivia was an only child. My wife and I tried to have others, but we couldn't." "Your wife. Are you still together?" Marcus lowered his head. "No, sir. She couldn't get over the loss. Said she couldn't look at me without remembering our daughter. She moved to Illinois, to her mother's house." Richard felt another pang in his chest. Marcus hadn't just lost his daughter, he'd lost his entire family. And all this time, Richard had treated him like just another employee, never imagining the depth of suffering the man carried. "I'm so sorry, Marcus, I didn't know." "You couldn't have known, sir, I never told anyone. But I should have noticed, I should have been more attentive, more human." Marcus looked at Richard in surprise. "Mr. Thompson, with all due respect, it's not an employer's duty to know about their employees' personal lives. Maybe it's not a duty, but it should be. We're human beings before we're employer and employee." Richard rose from his chair and walked to the window overlooking bustling Fifth Avenue. "Marcus, I want to make some changes in the company, and I want to start by getting to know the people who work with me better." "What kind of changes, sir?" "First, I want all employees to have better health coverage. Second, I want to create a support fund for staff going through hardships. And third, I want you to help me become a better boss." Marcus was silent for a moment, processing Richard's words. "Sir, may I ask what brought on these changes?" Richard returned to his chair and looked Marcus in the eye. "You did, Marcus. Or rather, your daughter did. Yesterday, when I saw you at the cemetery, I realized I'd been blind all these years to the humanity of the people around me." "Mr. Thompson, please let me finish. Marcus, you lost your daughter and I didn't even notice. You went through the worst moment of your life and I probably still expected you to work as usual. That's unforgivable. You didn't know, I never told anyone because I couldn't bring myself to talk about it. But I should have seen the signs. An employee who changes behavior, grows quieter, sometimes seems distant. I should have asked if you were okay, if you needed anything." Marcus felt his eyes well up. It had been so long since anyone genuinely cared about him. Since losing Olivia and his wife leaving, he'd lived a solitary life, finding purpose only in work and his daily visits to the cemetery. "Mr. Thompson, I appreciate your concern, but I don't want you to feel guilty. You've always been a good employer, paid me well, treated me with respect, gave me stability when I needed it most. But I want to be more than a good employer, Marcus. I want to be a better human being." Richard stood again and extended his hand. "I want us to be more than employer and employee. I want us to be friends." Marcus hesitated before shaking Richard's hand. He wasn't used to emotional closeness, especially at work, but there was something sincere in Richard's change that moved him deeply. "Mr. Thompson, may I ask you something?" "Of course, Marcus, and you can stop calling me sir all the time." "Why did you follow me yesterday?" Richard laughed for the first time in ages, a genuine, unforced laugh. "Because I'm an obsessive control freak who thought you were up to something shady during work hours." "And what did you think I was doing?" "Honestly, I thought you were mixed up in something suspicious or had a second job. I never imagined that I'd be visiting my daughter. I never imagined you were carrying so much pain alone." The two men remained silent for a few moments, each reflecting on how they had reached that point of mutual understanding. "Marcus, can I ask you a favor?" "Of course. Tomorrow, when you visit Olivia, I'd like to go with you. If you don't mind, of course." Marcus was surprised by the request. "You want to come with me to the cemetery? I'd like to meet your daughter, even if it's only through the stories you tell her." Marcus felt his chest tighten with emotion. It had been so long since anyone had shown interest in knowing Olivia. "I'd be honored, Mr. Richard." "Richard, just Richard. I'd be honored, Richard." That afternoon, Marcus didn't need to make excuses for his daily break. Richard let him leave early and asked to be informed if anything was needed. For the first time in 3 years, Marcus felt truly understood. Richard spent the rest of the day thinking about the changes he wanted to implement in the company. He called the Human Resources Department and scheduled a meeting to discuss improvements in employee benefits. He also asked his assistant to research support funds for employees in times of crisis. That night, Richard called Rebecca again. This time, it was he who talked about his day, about Marcus, about the discoveries he was making about himself. Rebecca listened carefully, and at the end of the conversation, she said something that stayed with Richard deeply. "Dad, I'm proud of you. I never thought I'd see you change like this. Why didn't you think I could change? Because you were always so closed off, so focused on work. Sometimes I felt like you didn't care about people, only results." Richard felt a pang of pain hearing those words, but he knew Rebecca was right. "And now, what do you think? Now I see there's a big heart in there. It was just hidden behind so much work and responsibility." When he hung up, Richard felt hopeful for the first time in years. Maybe it wasn't too late to become the person he should have always been. The next morning, Richard woke up early and stopped at a flower shop to buy a bouquet of white flowers. When he met Marcus at the office, the two left together for the cemetery. During the drive, Marcus shared more stories about Olivia, how clever and funny she was, how she loved asking questions about everything. Richard listened carefully to each story, mentally piecing together the image of a special little girl who had brought so much love into Marcus's life. "She loved playing businesswoman," Marcus said as he drove. "She'd hold meetings with her stuffed animals and pretend she was running a big company." "She wanted to be a businesswoman?" "No, she said she wanted to understand what Daddy did at work so she could help you take better care of people." Richard's eyes welled up. Olivia, without even knowing him, had cared about how he treated people. It was as if the little girl, though no longer here, was still teaching him important lessons. When they arrived at the cemetery, Marcus led Richard along the familiar path to Olivia's grave. Richard was moved to see the simple but well-kept headstone with fresh flowers Marcus had left the day before. "Hi, sweetheart," Marcus said, kneeling beside the grave. "Today, Daddy brought a friend to meet you." Richard knelt beside Marcus and placed his bouquet next to the other flowers. "Hi, Olivia. My name is Richard and I work with your dad. He tells me you were a very special girl." Marcus smiled as he listened to Richard speaking to Olivia. "He's learning to be a better person, my dear, just like you always taught me to be." The two men spent an hour at the cemetery. Marcus told Olivia about the changes happening at work, about how Richard was becoming more human. Richard, in turn, promised the girl that he would take better care of her father and all the company's employees. When they left the cemetery, Richard felt transformed. There was something powerful about talking to Olivia, even knowing she couldn't respond. It was as if the loving energy of the girl was still present, positively influencing everyone around her. "Marcus, can I tell you a secret?" Richard said as they walked back to the car. "Of course." "I have a daughter, Rebecca, who lives in Washington, D.C. Until this week, I barely spoke to her. Our conversations were only about money and obligations. After hearing your story, I called her, and we had the best talk we've had in years." "That's wonderful, Richard. Children are precious gifts. Your daughter taught me that. Even though she's not here, she showed me the value of truly caring for people." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now back to the story. Back at the office, Richard implemented the first changes. He called all the employees to a meeting and for the first time in his business career was completely honest about his intentions. "Everyone, I want to apologize," Richard began, looking at the 23 employees gathered in the conference room. "All these years, I've been a distant and cold boss. I cared more about results than people, and that was wrong." The employees exchanged glances, surprised by the sudden shift in their boss's behavior. Mrs. Betty adjusted her glasses and watched Richard carefully, trying to understand what had sparked this transformation. "Starting today, I want to make some important changes. First, all of you will have access to an expanded health plan, including psychological and dental coverage. Second, I'm creating an emergency fund to support employees going through personal hardships." Jason, a young 28-year-old accountant, raised his hand timidly. "Mr. Richard, may I ask what inspired these changes?" Richard looked at Marcus, who was leaning against the back wall of the room. "A friend taught me that we're a family here, not just co-workers, and families support each other." After the meeting, several employees approached Richard to thank him for the changes. For the first time, he genuinely talked to each of them, asking about their lives, their challenges, and their dreams. Jessica, the 35-year-old receptionist, shared that she was studying business administration at night and dreamed of growing in the company. Frank, the 50-year-old head mechanic, revealed he had a son with disabilities and that the new health plan would make a huge difference for his family. Each conversation touched Richard in a different way. He was discovering that there were incredible people working beside him all these years, people with fascinating stories and inspiring dreams he had never taken the time to know. At the end of the day, Richard called Marcus into his office again. "How do you feel about the changes?" "Honestly? Surprised? I never imagined you could change so much in such a short time." "I'm surprised at myself too. But you know what surprises me the most?" "What?" "How good it feels to be a better person. I always thought showing emotion or caring about employees was a sign of weakness. Now I see it's exactly the opposite." Marcus smiled. "Olivia always said true strength was in caring for people, not controlling them. Your daughter was very wise." "She was. She taught me almost everything I know about being a good person." Richard grew thoughtful for a moment. "Marcus, can I ask you a personal question?" "Of course." "How do you keep so much kindness in your heart after everything you've been through?" Marcus took a deep breath before answering. "Because Olivia taught me that love doesn't end when someone leaves. Love transforms into actions, into caring for others, into trying to make the world a little better." "Do you think she'd be proud of the man you've become?" "I hope so. Every day I try to honor her memory by being the best person I can be." Richard felt his eyes well up again. "I want to learn how to do that too. I want to honor your daughter's memory by becoming a better man." "Richard, can I tell you something?" "Of course." "Olivia would be so happy knowing she helped you change. She always believed people could become better when they received love and understanding." That night, Richard had an idea. He called Rebecca and told her about Marcus and Olivia. His daughter was moved by the story and suggested something that touched Richard deeply. "Dad, why don't you create some kind of tribute to Olivia, something that helps other children?" "What kind of tribute do you suggest?" "I don't know. A social project, a scholarship, something that keeps her memory alive by helping other kids." Richard fell silent, absorbing Rebecca's suggestion. It was a perfect idea, a way to turn Marcus's pain into hope for other families. The next day, Richard called Marcus into his office early. "Marcus, I have a proposal for you." "What kind of proposal?" "I want to create a social project in Olivia's memory, a fund to help underprivileged children access quality medical care." Marcus was completely surprised. "Richard, I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything now. Just think about it. It would be a way to turn pain into hope, to let your daughter's memory help other children." "You'd really do that?" "I would. In fact, I want to. Olivia taught me, through you, to be a better person. I want to give back somehow." Marcus felt his eyes fill with tears. She'd be so happy knowing she's helping other children. "So, do you accept?" "More than accept. I'm honored." The two men began planning the project that same day. Richard used his connections to establish partnerships with children's hospitals, while Marcus contributed his personal experience with the struggles families face when their children are sick. 2 weeks later, the Olivia Project, Hope and Life, was officially launched. The project provided financial and emotional support to families of children needing medical treatment, along with recreational activities at partner hospitals. On launch day, Richard made sure the ceremony took place at the cemetery, beside Olivia's grave. All the company employees were there, as well as representatives from partner hospitals. Marcus gave a heartfelt speech, sharing about his daughter and how she had inspired the project. Richard also spoke, thanking Olivia for changing his life, even though he had never met her. "Olivia," Richard said, looking at the headstone, Through your father's love for you, you taught me to be a better man. This project is our way of making sure your love keeps spreading through the world." Mrs. Betty, who had been deeply moved by the whole story, approached Marcus after the ceremony. "Marcus, I want to apologize for never asking how you were all these years. I knew you were going through hardships, but I didn't push to see how I could help. Mrs. Betty, you've always been kind to me. You don't need to apologize for anything." "Yes, I do. We all should have been more attentive, more caring. Your daughter deserved better care from us." Marcus Johnson embraced Mrs. Betty and the two cried together. It was the first time in 3 years that Marcus had cried in front of others, and he felt relieved to share his grief with people who truly cared about him. In the following months, the Olivia Project, Hope and Life, helped dozens of families. Richard Thompson regularly visited the partner hospitals, getting to know the children supported by the project and their families. Each visit reminded him why he had decided to change his life. During one of these visits, Richard met Lily, a 7-year-old girl who had been hospitalized for 2 weeks. When she learned Richard was the founder of the project helping her family, she asked a question that deeply moved him. "Uncle Richard, why did you start this project?" Richard knelt beside the girl's bed and explained simply about Marcus and Olivia. Lily listened carefully and at the end said something Richard would never forget. "So, Olivia is like an angel helping other kids through you?" "I think so, Lily. She's like an angel teaching us to take better care of each other." When Richard shared this conversation with Marcus, both were moved. This was exactly how they wanted the project to be seen, as an extension of Olivia's love for the world. 6 months after the project's launch, Richard received an unexpected call. It was Rebecca, his daughter, calling from Washington, D.C. with news that made him overjoyed. "Dad, I've decided to write my thesis on the Olivia Project, Hope and Life." "Really? About the project?" "Yes. I want to study how corporate social initiatives can transform not just the communities they serve, but also the people who create them. Your project is a perfect example of how pain can turn into love and hope." Richard's chest swelled with pride. His daughter not only approved of his changes, but wanted to study them academically. "Rebecca, would you like to come to New York City to meet Marcus and see the project firsthand?" "I'd love to, Dad. Actually, can I ask you something?" "Of course, sweetheart. When I come, can you take me to meet Olivia?" Richard was silent for a few seconds, touched by Rebecca's request. "Of course, sweetheart. I'm sure Marcus would be honored to introduce you to her." A week later, Rebecca arrived in New York City for a 5-day visit. Richard picked her up at the airport himself, something he hadn't done in years. On the way to the hotel, Rebecca remarked how her father seemed different, lighter, more human. On the first day of the visit, Richard took Rebecca to the office to meet all the staff. She was impressed by the warm, family-like atmosphere that had developed in the company. Mrs. Betty welcomed her like a beloved granddaughter, and Marcus was kind and polite when they met. "Marcus, my dad told me your whole story," Rebecca said during lunch. "I wanted to say how much I admire your strength and how you turned your pain into something positive." "Thank you, Rebecca. Your father has become a very special person. Olivia would be happy knowing she helped bring you two closer. It's true. Before learning your story, my dad and I barely spoke. Now we talk almost every day." Richard smiled, watching his daughter and Marcus converse. It was amazing how Olivia had positively influenced so many people, even though she was no longer physically present. On the second day of the visit, Richard took Rebecca to tour the project's partner hospitals. She met several of the children and their families, documenting everything for her thesis. She also interviewed doctors and nurses about the project's impact on hospital routines. During the visit to the Manhattan Children's Medical Center, Rebecca met Lily, the girl who had compared Olivia to an angel. The two talked at length, and Lily told Rebecca how the project had helped her family not give up on treatment. "Aunt Rebecca, did you know your father is a really good person?" Lily said. "Lily, I'm just realizing that now," Rebecca replied, looking affectionately at Richard. On the third day, the moment Rebecca had been waiting for arrived, meeting Olivia. Richard, Marcus, and Rebecca went together to the cemetery on a sunny June morning. Marcus led Rebecca to the grave and made the formal introductions. "Olivia, this is Rebecca, Richard's daughter. She came from far away to meet you." Rebecca knelt beside the grave and placed a small bouquet of daisies. Flowers she had discovered were Olivia's favorites. "Hi, Olivia. I wanted to thank you for changing my father's life and for giving me a better dad." Richard watched his daughter speaking to Olivia and felt a deep peace in his heart. It was as if all the pieces of his life were finally falling into place. After the cemetery visit, the three went to lunch at a nearby steakhouse. During the meal, Rebecca asked a question that surprised both Richard and Marcus. "Marcus, have you ever thought about writing a book about Olivia?" Marcus was taken aback by the suggestion. "A book? About my daughter?" "Yes. Her story is so inspiring. The way you handled loss, how you turned pain into love, how you've influenced others. It could help so many parents going through similar situations." Richard thought the idea was fantastic. "Rebecca's right, Marcus. Your story could inspire so many people." "I don't know how to write books," Marcus said, clearly uncomfortable with the suggestion. "You wouldn't have to do it alone," Rebecca explained. "There are writers who specialize in biographies. You'd tell your story, and they'd help put it on paper." Marcus thought about the proposal for a few minutes. "Do you really think Olivia's story could help others?" "I'm certain," Richard said. "Your story already changed my life and is changing the lives of dozens of families through the project. A book would bring that inspiration to so many more people. And the book's proceeds could go entirely to the Olivia Project," Rebecca added. Marcus was moved by the idea. "If you think it could help others, I'm willing to try." 2 months later, Marcus began working with an experienced biographer to tell Olivia's story. The process was emotionally challenging, but also therapeutic. Recalling happy moments with his daughter brought joy to Marcus's heart, while talking about the pain of loss helped him process his feelings better. Richard closely followed the entire process, offering emotional support and practical help whenever needed. The friendship between the two had solidified in a way neither had imagined possible years before. During this time, the Olivia Project continued to grow. New partnerships were formed, more hospitals were included, and hundreds of families were helped. Richard realized he had found a greater purpose in life, something far beyond profits and financial results. The company also thrived under the changes Richard implemented. Employees, feeling more valued and supported, became more productive and committed. Turnover dropped dramatically, and the company came to be seen as an example of a humane workplace. Mrs. Betty, who had initially been surprised by Richard's changes, became one of the strongest advocates of the company's new philosophy. She helped implement several employee wellness initiatives and became a sort of mother figure to the corporate family that had formed. 1 year after launching the project, Richard organized a birthday celebration in honor of Olivia. The event took place in the company auditorium, but was live-streamed to all partner hospitals, allowing the children receiving care to participate virtually. Marcus gave a heartfelt speech, thanking everyone who had supported the project and kept his daughter's memory alive. Richard also spoke, sharing how Olivia had transformed not only his personal life, but the entire company culture. During the celebration, a special surprise was revealed. Rebecca, who had returned to New York City just for the event, announced that her thesis on the Olivia Project had received top marks and would be published as an article in an academic journal for social psychology. "Olivia didn't just inspire a social project," Rebecca said during her speech. "She created a new way of thinking about human relationships, about how pain can be turned into love, about how a single act of kindness can multiply endlessly." At the end of the celebration, Richard, Marcus, and Rebecca went together to Greenwood Cemetery to tell Olivia about the day's events. It was a tradition they had developed. Whenever something important happened related to the project, they shared it with her. "My daughter," Marcus said, kneeling beside the grave. "Today, hundreds of people gathered to celebrate your life and thank you for everything you taught us. You're helping children you never met, inspiring adults who never saw you, changing hearts that never knew your name." Richard placed a hand on Marcus's shoulder. "Olivia, thank you for teaching me to be a better father, a better boss, a better human being. I promise to keep honoring your memory every day of my life." Rebecca also spoke. "Olivia, you gave me a gift I didn't even know I needed. My father back. Thank you for teaching us that true love never ends. It just transforms into new ways of caring for others." 2 years into their journey of transformation, Richard was in a meeting with representatives from other companies interested in implementing projects similar to Olivia's. His company had become a benchmark for corporate social responsibility, and he was often invited to speak about humanizing the workplace. During a break in the meeting, Richard received a call from Marcus. "Richard, can you come to Riverside Children's Hospital? There's a surprise here for you." Puzzled, Richard excused himself from the meeting and went straight to the hospital. When he arrived, he found Marcus in the pediatric wing with a radiant smile. "What happened?" Richard asked. "Remember Lily, the little girl who said Olivia was like an angel?" "Of course I remember. She was discharged today. The treatment was a complete success." Richard felt his eyes fill with tears. Lily had been one of the first children helped by the project, and following her recovery had been an emotional experience for everyone involved. "She wants to talk to you before she leaves," Marcus said. Richard found Lily in her room, surrounded by family and making final preparations to go home. When she saw Richard, she ran to hug him. "Uncle Richard, I'm cured. The angel Olivia helped me get better." Richard hugged her with all the warmth in his heart. "That's wonderful, Lily. You're such a strong and brave girl. Uncle Richard, when I grow up, I want to help sick kids just like you do. Can I work with you?" "Of course you can, Lily. You'll always be welcome in our family." After Lily left with her parents, Richard and Marcus stayed at the hospital talking with other patients and their families. It was something they did regularly, a way to stay closely connected with the people the project served. During one of these conversations, Richard met Mr. Robert, a 70-year-old man who was accompanying his 5-year-old grandson in the hospital. Mr. Robert shared that he had lost his son in an accident and was now raising his grandson alone. "Mr. Thompson," said Mr. Robert, "your project didn't just save my grandson, it saved our entire family. I wouldn't have been able to afford his treatment." Richard was moved by his words. "The project exists for that very reason, Mr. Robert, so no family has to face these struggles alone." "Can I ask you a personal question?" "Of course." "What makes a successful businessman like you care about people like us?" Richard looked over at Marcus, who was talking with some children in the hallway, and smiled. "A friend taught me that caring for others isn't just a moral duty. It's the only way to live a life that truly matters." That night, Richard called Rebecca to tell her about Lily and Mr. Robert. His daughter had moved back to New York City and was now volunteering as a psychologist for the project, offering emotional support to the families they helped. "Dad, do you realize the impact you're having on these people's lives?" "I do, and I also realize they're having an even bigger impact on mine." "How so?" "Every family we meet, every child we help, every smile we see, it all reminds me that life only has meaning when we live for something greater than ourselves." "Do you think Olivia knew this would happen?" Richard thought for a moment. "You know what I think, Rebecca? I think Olivia is still taking care of all of us, through the love her father has for her and the love we've learned to have for one another." 3 years after his transformation, Richard was invited to speak at a national conference on corporate social responsibility. The event took place in Washington, D.C., and Rebecca joined him. During his speech, Richard shared the entire story of the Olivia project, from the moment he followed Marcus at Greenwood Cemetery to the project's current achievements. The audience was deeply moved, and many business owners approached him afterward to learn how they could implement similar initiatives in their companies. "Mr. Thompson," asked a young entrepreneur, "what was the hardest change you had to make during this process?" Richard thought carefully before answering. "The hardest change was admitting I was wrong. For years, I believed being a good leader meant keeping an emotional distance from people. Realizing that this was making me a worse person and a less effective leader was painful but necessary." "And what change brought you the most joy?" "Learning to see my employees as family, discovering their stories, their dreams, their fears. realizing that every person is a unique and fascinating world. After the speech, Richard and Rebecca had dinner together at a cozy restaurant in Washington, D.C. Over the meal, Rebecca made an observation that touched Richard deeply. "Dad, do you know you've completely changed my view of work and leadership?" "How so?" "Before I saw the corporate world as cold and competitive. Now I see it's possible to create workplaces based on love and mutual care." "And does that influence your career?" "Very much. I'm thinking of specializing in organizational psychology to help other companies become more human." Richard smiled proudly. "Olivia is still inspiring people, even through you." "It's true. She became a constant presence in our family, even without having known us." When they returned to New York City, Richard found Marcus especially excited. The book about Olivia was ready to be released, and the publisher had organized a book signing at the city's largest bookstore. "Richard, I'm nervous," Marcus confessed. "What if people don't like the story?" Marcus: "Impossible. Olivia's story is one of the most beautiful I've ever known. People will be moved and inspired, just like I was." The book launch was an absolute success. Hundreds of people attended the event, many of them families who had been helped by the project. Lily was there with her parents, now fully recovered and full of energy. During the presentation, Marcus read an excerpt from the book that recounted his last conversation with Olivia before she passed. Not a single eye in the audience stayed dry. "This story doesn't end with my daughter's passing," Marcus said at the end of the presentation. "This story begins with her passing, because it was from that moment I learned that true love multiplies when it's shared." Richard watched the presentation with a heart full of pride and gratitude. Marcus had become not just a dear friend, but also a constant source of inspiration and wisdom. After the event, everyone involved in the project gathered for a celebratory dinner. Mrs. Betty, who had retired but still participated in the project's activities as a volunteer, gave a heartfelt toast. "4 years ago, I worked at a cold company where the boss barely spoke to us. Today, I'm part of a family where everyone genuinely cares for one another. That was only possible because a little 8-year-old girl taught a stubborn businessman to open his heart." Everyone laughed and applauded. Richard stood to respond to the toast. "Mrs. Betty is right. Olivia taught me that true leadership isn't about commanding people, but about caring for them. The Olivia Project isn't just a social initiative. It's a philosophy of life that reminds us daily that we're all connected by love." Marcus also spoke up. "When my daughter passed, I thought my life was over. You all showed me that her life had only transformed into something greater. Through the project, through the friendships we've built, through the love we share, Olivia continues to change the world every day." Rebecca, who was filming the dinner to document the celebration, stopped recording and joined the toast. "I'd like to propose a special toast to Olivia, who taught us that love never dies, it only multiplies." "To Olivia!" everyone exclaimed in unison. 6 months later, Marcus's book became a national bestseller. Olivia's story inspired people across the country, and many companies began implementing similar social projects. Richard was invited to give talks in several cities, always accompanied by Marcus. The two had become an inseparable pair, sharing the message that personal and social transformation is possible when love overcomes fear and pride. During one of these trips to Boston, Richard received an unexpected call. It was Vanessa Johnson, Marcus's ex-wife, calling from Chicago. "Mr. Richard, it's Vanessa, Marcus's ex-wife. Can I speak with him?" Richard was surprised. Marcus had never mentioned staying in touch with his ex-wife. "Of course, Vanessa, I'll get him." Marcus answered the phone with visible nervousness. It had been 2 years since he last spoke to Vanessa, ever since she moved to Illinois. "Hi, Marcus, I saw your television interview about the book and the project. I wanted to congratulate you." "Thank you, Vanessa. How are you?" "I'm better. I went to therapy, managed to process our daughter's loss in a healthier way." "Marcus, I wanted to apologize to you." Marcus felt his heart race. "Apologize for what?" "For abandoning you when you needed support the most, for not being able to face the pain alongside you, for being selfish with my own grief and forgetting yours." Marcus was moved. For years, he had blamed himself for the end of their marriage, wondering if he could have done something differently to keep Jessica by his side. Jessica, you have nothing to apologize for. We each dealt with the pain the best we could. I know, but I wanted you to know I recognize how much you suffered alone, and I want you to know how proud I am of the man you've become. Thank you, Jessica. That means a lot to me. Marcus, can I ask you for a favor? Of course. On Olivia's birthday next month, I'd like to visit her grave. Could we meet there? Marcus looked at Richard, who was listening intently. Richard gave an encouraging nod. Of course, Jessica. It would be good to have you there. When Marcus hung up, he was visibly emotional. Richard embraced him like a brother. How do you feel? Relieved. For so long, I carried guilt over the end of our marriage. Now I see we both did the best we could under the circumstances. And now, how do you feel about seeing Jessica again? Nervous, but happy. I think this conversation will be important for both of us, to close a chapter and find peace. The following month, Richard accompanied Marcus to the cemetery on Olivia's birthday. Jessica arrived a few minutes later, visibly nervous but determined. Richard stepped back discreetly to give the former couple privacy. From a distance, he watched Marcus and Jessica talking by Olivia's grave. Both cried, embraced, and finally seemed to be making peace with the past. After an hour, Jessica approached Richard. Mr. Richard, Marcus told me all about you and the project. I want to thank you for taking such good care of him. No, thank you, Jessica. Marcus has taught me to be a better person. He said you've become great friends. More than friends. Marcus is like a brother to me. Jessica smiled. Olivia would be happy knowing her father found a family of the heart. Before leaving, Jessica placed a letter on Olivia's grave, a farewell note where she finally expressed all the pain, love, and longing she had carried for years. Marcus and Richard continued visiting Olivia together every day. It became a sacred ritual, a moment of reflection and connection that strengthened their friendship and kept them grounded in the values Olivia represented. End of story. And now, dear listener, what did you think of this story of transformation and love? Do you believe it's possible to completely change how we see and treat those around us? Share your thoughts about Richard and Marcus in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more heartfelt stories like this one.